Okay, so uh, ready to dive into a story that's, well, it's a bit of a cautionary tale, I guess you could say.
Oh, absolutely. A story about hope and progress, but also about how easily those can be shattered by, well, powerful forces.
Yeah, it's about Guatemala in the 1950s,
Yeah.
a country that had just emerged from decades of dictatorship. They finally had a taste of democracy and were ready to tackle some serious social and economic issues.
Exactly. And they had this charismatic leader, Jacobo Arbenz, who was elected president in 1951. He was determined to make things right, to lift people out of poverty.
But his vision, well, it threatened the interests of some very powerful players, both within Guatemala and outside of it.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to get really messy.
Yeah, we're talking about a CIA-backed coup, a story of Cold War machinations and corporate greed, and ultimately a tragedy for Guatemala and its people.
We're going to unpack all of that today using a fascinating account from the History Daily podcast.
It's a deep dive into a pivotal moment in history, one that still has repercussions today.
So to really understand what happened in 1954, we need to rewind a bit, go back to the 1944 October Revolution. This is where it all begins, right?
Yeah, this revolution, it was a watershed moment for Guatemala. It overthrew the dictatorship and paved the way for democratic reforms.
Okay, so after years of oppression, Guatemala is finally breathing freely. They elect Juan Jose Arevalo, their first democratically elected president.
Yeah.
What kind of changes did he bring about?
Well, Arevalo, he was a reformer. He believed in social justice and wanted to empower the people. He introduced social security programs, championed labor rights, and really tried to improve the lives of the indigenous population who had been marginalized for centuries.
Sounds like he was making some real progress, but I'm guessing not everyone was thrilled about these changes.
You're right, there was pushback from the wealthy elite, those who benefited from the old system. Arevalo even faced several coup attempts during his presidency, showing just how much resistance there was to change.
So it was a pretty volatile environment, even with these democratic reforms taking hold.
Oh, absolutely. And into this mix steps Jacobo Arbenz, a young military officer who had played a role in the 1944 revolution. He shared Arevalo's vision for a more equitable Guatemala.
And he wins the presidency in 1951, but even his rise to power wasn't without controversy, right?
Yeah, there's this mysterious death of his main rival, a conservative general, just before the election.
Adds another layer of intrigue to this story.
It definitely does, and it's worth noting that the circumstances surrounding the general's death were never fully clarified, leading to a lot of speculation and suspicion.
Okay, so Arbenz comes to power with this legacy of reform and, well, a bit of a cloud hanging over the election. Now, what was his big plan? What was he hoping to achieve for Guatemala?
His central focus was on land redistribution. He saw the vast inequality in land ownership as the root of many of Guatemala's problems.
Okay, makes sense. A small elite held most of the arable land, while the majority of the population, mainly indigenous people, were landless and living in poverty.
Exactly. And to address this, Arbenz introduced Decree 900 in 1952.
This is his landmark land reform policy, right?
Yes. It allowed the government to purchase uncultivated land from large landowners, including foreign companies, and redistribute it to peasant farmers.
So it wasn't about seizing land, but more about making sure it was being used productively and that everyone had a fair chance.
Precisely, landowners were compensated for the land that was purchased, but many of them, especially the wealthy, elite, and foreign companies, saw this as a direct attack on their power and privilege.
I bet they did. And this is where a certain fruit company enters the picture, right?
You got it. The United Fruit Company, or UFCO, as it was known then, they were a massive multinational corporation. They basically controlled the banana industry in Guatemala.
So they had a lot at stake. They owned huge tracts of land, much of it uncultivated, which made them a prime target for Arbenz's land reform.
Exactly. And UFCO wasn't about to let this happen without a fight.
Oh.
They had powerful connections in the U.S. government. They lobbied hard to paint Arbenz as a communist threat.
So now we see the Cold War angle coming into play.
Yeah, it's the 1950s. The U.S. is obsessed with containing communism, and they saw any left-leaning government, even a democratically elected one like Arbenz's, as a potential domino in the fall to communism.
Even though Arbenz's policies were more about social democracy than communism, right?
Yeah, he wasn't trying to install a Soviet-style regime. He was trying to improve the lives of his people, but that nuance was lost on the U.S. government, especially with USCO whispering in their ear.
So you have this perfect storm brewing: a reform-minded president, a powerful corporation feeling threatened, and a global superpower with its own agenda.
And that's a recipe for disaster, as we'll see.
Let's talk about that disaster then. How did the U.S. go from expressing disapproval to actually orchestrating a coup?
Well, it started with economic pressure. They cut off aid to Guatemala. They pressured other countries not to sell them arms. They basically tried to isolate them internationally.
So try to cripple them economically and make them vulnerable?
Exactly. And then they started planning a covert operation under the code name PBS Success.
PB success sounds pretty ominous.
It was. The CIA began training and arming a small rebel force led by a disgruntled former Guatemalan military officer, Carlos Castillo Armas.
So they were setting the stage for a proxy war, making it look like an internal uprising.
Yeah, they wanted to avoid any overt U.S. involvement, at least publicly. They even had a clandestine radio station, the Voice of Liberation, broadcasting anti-Arbenz propaganda, spreading rumors of an impending invasion, trying to create a climate of fear and instability.
A classic propaganda campaign
Yeah.
designed to undermine Arbenz's authority
Yeah.
and make people doubt his leadership.
Exactly. They also staged events like mock air raids over Guatemala City to make it seem like the rebels were a much larger force than they actually were.
So they were creating this illusion of chaos, making it seem like Arbenz was losing control.
That was the goal. And they had help from within Guatemala, too. Conservative politicians, military officers, and even the Catholic Church, they all played a role in undermining Arbenz.
It sounds like a well-coordinated effort, a lot of different players working towards the same goal.
It was. And the U.S. ambassador to Guatemala at the time, John Purefoy, he was a key figure in all of this. He met with Guatemalan officials, he pressured them, he downplayed U.S. involvement. He basically acted as the point man for the coup.
So it was a very hands-on approach,
Yeah.
even though they were trying to maintain this facade of non-interference.
Exactly. And all of this pressure, all this propaganda, it started to take its toll on Arbenz and his government.
He was facing opposition from within and outside. It must have been incredibly difficult to navigate.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
He tried to rally international support. He denounced the U.S.'s actions, but it was an uphill battle.
I imagine it felt like the walls were closing in.
Absolutely. And as the situation deteriorated, Arbenz started to fear that resisting the coup would lead to a bloodbath, a full-scale U.S. invasion.
So he was in a terrible bind, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. And in the end, he decided to resign, hoping that this would prevent further bloodshed.
What a heartbreaking decision. To give up power not because you've lost the support of the people, but because of this external pressure, this orchestrated campaign to remove you.
It was a devastating blow to Arbenz and to the hopes of many Guatemalans, but he believed that stepping down was the best way to protect his country.
In his farewell address, he expressed hope for the future. But you can hear the anguish in his voice, the weight of this decision.
It's a powerful moment, a testament to his commitment to his people, even in the face of such adversity.
But unfortunately, as we'll see, his resignation didn't lead to the peaceful transition he had hoped for. The U.S. had other plans. They were ready to install their own man in power.
And that's where we'll pick up next time, with the aftermath of the coup and the long shadow it cast on Guatemala.
Yeah, Arbenz steps down thinking that'll maybe calm things down, but
Well, the U.S. had a different endgame in mind, right?
absolutely. They were ready with their guy, Castillo Armas. Remember him, the ex-military officer the CIA had been training?
Right. So they just slide him right into power. Pretty much. It all happened very quickly. They had the military on their side, they controlled the media, and, well, there wasn't much anyone could do.
So much for a peaceful transition of power.
It was anything but peaceful. Armas came in and immediately started rolling back all of Arbenz's reforms.
Back to square one for Guatemala then.
Even worse, actually. It wasn't just about reversing the reforms. Armas also launched a campaign of repression against anyone who had supported Arbenz or his policies.
So basically purging anyone who had dared to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. Teachers, union leaders, peasant activists, anyone suspected of communist sympathies, they were targeted, imprisoned, tortured, even killed.
Creating a climate of fear and silencing any dissent.
That was the goal, to make sure no one would ever try something like Arbenz's reforms again.
So they snuffed out the flame of democracy before it could really take hold.
And in doing so, they sowed the seeds for a much larger conflict, the Guatemalan Civil War.
Ah, so this is where things really spiral out of control.
Yeah. It was a brutal conflict that lasted for decades. It pitted the government, backed by the U.S., against various leftist guerrilla groups, many of whom were fighting for the same things that Arbenz had championed.
So in a way, the coup was the catalyst for this long and bloody war.
Absolutely. It created this deep resentment, this sense of injustice that fueled the insurgency. The inequalities that Arbenz had tried to address were never resolved, and they festered, leading to this eruption of violence.
A tragic echo of the hope that had been so quickly extinguished.
Exactly. And the war was devastating for Guatemala. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed or disappeared, entire villages were wiped out. The country was traumatized.
And even though it officially ended in 1996 with a peace agreement, the scars of that conflict still run deep today.
They do. It's a reminder of the long-lasting consequences of foreign intervention, of how meddling in other countries' affairs can have repercussions for generations.
A cautionary tale if there ever was one. So the U.S. gets its way. They install a pro-American regime. They protect their corporate interests, but at what cost?
At the cost of democracy, at the cost of human lives, at the cost of Guatemala's future.
It's a pretty bleak picture.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember these events because they teach us valuable lessons about power, about interventionism, about the dangers of letting ideology trump human rights.
And as we'll see in the next part, these lessons are still relevant today because the patterns of intervention, the justifications, the tactics, they haven't really changed all that much.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about this, well, this really dark chapter in Guatemala's history, the 1954 coup.
Yeah, a story that really highlights how Cold War fears and corporate greed can, well, they can completely derail a nation's progress.
And it's not just a history lesson,
Yeah.
right? There's some unsettling parallels to things happening in the world today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. We still see powerful countries intervening in the affairs of weaker ones, often for economic or geopolitical gain.
It's like that old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right. And the justifications haven't changed much either.
Huh.
You know, back then it was all about stopping the spread of communism.
Now it's terrorism or national security or whatever label they choose to use.
The methods might be a bit more sophisticated now, but the underlying goal is often the same: control, influence, resources.
It's like they learn nothing from the mistakes of the past.
Well, you'd hope they would, but history seems to repeat itself, especially when it comes to power and greed.
One thing that really stands out to me in the Guatemalan coup is the role of propaganda.
Oh, absolutely. It was crucial to the success of the operation. They had to convince the Guatemalan people and the world that Arbenz was a threat, that he had to be removed.
And they did a pretty effective job of it, using the media, spreading rumors, staging events.
Yeah, they created this whole narrative, this alternate reality to justify their actions.
And we see that happening today too, right? With social media, disinformation campaigns. It's even easier to manipulate people to sow division and distrust.
Oh, it's definitely more sophisticated now, but the basic principles are the same. You know, create fear, demonize your opponents, control the information flow.
It's a dangerous game, and unfortunately, it's one that's being played out all over the world.
Yeah, and the consequences can be devastating, just like they were in Guatemala.
So what can we do about it? It can feel pretty overwhelming, like we're just pawns in this global chess game.
Well, I think the first step is awareness, like we've been talking about today. You know, understanding how these systems of power operate, recognizing the patterns of intervention.
Educating ourselves and others,
Right.
So we can spot the propaganda, the manipulation.
Exactly. And then we can start holding our leaders accountable, demanding transparency, pushing for policies that prioritize human rights over corporate interests.
It's about making informed choices, supporting organizations that are fighting for justice, using our voices to speak out against wrongdoing.
Yeah, it might sound like a cliche, but individual actions do matter. Every little bit helps to shift the balance of power.
It's about not being complacent, not accepting the status quo, and recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world.
Well said. And, you know, even though the Guatemalan coup was a tragedy, it can also serve as a source of inspiration.
How so?
Well, it shows that even in the face of overwhelming odds, people can resist, they can fight for what they believe in.
And even though Arbenz was ultimately overthrown, his vision, his commitment to social justice, it continues to inspire people today.
It's a reminder that the struggle for a better world is never ending, and that even small acts of courage and defiance can have a ripple effect.
So yeah, it's a story of loss and tragedy, but also one of hope and resilience.
And hopefully it can serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the mistakes we need to avoid and the values we need to uphold.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the 1954 Guatemalan coup.
It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking discussion, and I hope our listeners will continue to explore these issues, to learn from the past, and to engage in the important work of building a better future.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep diving deep.